World Regions Geography 110, South Asia, Part 3. Understanding the British Raj continued. Understanding the British Raj is key to understanding modern South Asia. The British Raj defines much of the geopolitical realities of modern South Asia. What we mean by this is a lot of the political situation and balancing, whether it's Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. Pakistan and India are both nuclear countries. They have threatened nuclear war against each other. Much of this, Bangladesh, is also defined by the British Raj. And the British Raj was something that actually developed over about 100 years. The British came in, they played one group against another in a balancing act to maintain control. So they played various groups. There was a caste system in India. It was the dominant political control of the region. The British came in and played the lower groups and the upper groups against the middle. The Raj is for the Rajas, who ruled a lot of the area of India. India was not actually what we think of today as a country, but more a collection of principalities. And some were big, some were powerful, some were weak. And the British would play each of these against each other. And they left the elites largely, as long as the elites would support the British, they left the elites in control. And so the elites had a real interest in helping to maintain British control, because it gave them the power, where you would have many small rulers who were all about equal in power. If the British were on their side, they could take control and gain some territory, some wealth. And India, South Asia, was very wealthy. India was referred to as the crown jewel in the British Empire. India was the source of the many precious stones, rubies, emeralds, sapphires, many others, topaz, all came out of the Deccan Plain. There's mines there that have been there for thousands of years. That was one of the main things that was traded into Europe and into China out of India on the Silk Road. This trading network were precious stones, and these principalities in India were extremely wealthy. But there was also a large percent of the population that was at the very bottom, the untouchables. So this group also benefited greatly from the British coming in, because they banned the caste system, and this gave these people at the bottom an opportunity to rise up in life, where before they had had none. But the one thing about British policy, colonial policy, was that it was extractive in nature. And what we mean by this is that British colonial policy was there for one thing: control it and get as much wealth out and send it to Britain. That was the key fundamental issue. That wealth came out in many different forms. One of the things we want to talk about is the Gurmit. Some of you may or may not be familiar with it, but the British Colonial Office looked at India when they ended slavery in the early 19th century throughout the British Empire, and by the 1830s they had were no longer allowing the export of slaves from Africa, so British ships would stop any ship carrying slaves and return the Africans to Africa. So but there was a lot of sugar plantations, rubber plantations, these sorts of things that needed labor. So they began looking around, and there was lots and lots and lots of labor in India. So they set up this policy called the Gurmit, which was labor pool for the empire. And the Gurmit is why you find so many people of South Asian ancestry in the Caribbean, in Guyana, in Fiji, in Madagascar, in East Africa, throughout the British colonies in Africa, was because of this exporting of labor. The Gurmitis, as they were referred to, were exported throughout the globe, and this was the beginning of the Indian diaspora. And they were sent primarily male. About 70% were male. They were sent out to various locations. Initially, it was to replace slave labor in sugar plantations in the Caribbean and in the South Pacific, Fiji, Madagascar. But it also included colonial officers sent out, which were oftentimes Sikh or Muslim soldiers in the British colonial army, who were sent out to be the policemen of the British Empire, whether it was in China or throughout Asia, the South Pacific, or all the way into the Caribbean. This Gurmit went on for approximately about 80 years. And during that time, the labor rate was set in the 1830s and remained the same until the Gurmit ended during World War I. Now, the political unrest, there was a constant political unrest and colonial wars, and the British maintained control with relatively few armed troops because they used locals and played one group against the other. So the Sikhs were one of the local groups that were used in the military and police throughout, because the Sikhs were a small minority, so they were given power because they were in the military. They would also play Muslims and Hindus against each other. So in Sikh regions, you might have Muslim or Hindu troops. In Hindu regions, you would have Sikh and Muslim troops, and they would play those around. And the Rajas, of course, were the local rulers, the local princes. They were fabulously wealthy. Most of the Rolls Royces sold in the world were sold in India in the 30s. They were still fabulously wealthy, lots of jewels. They had a vested interest in helping to maintain British political control, but at the same time, various Rajas would attempt to break British control to seize more territory. And not to say that everything that the British did was bad, because it wasn't. They also built infrastructure. They built trains, they built hospitals, they built universities. They attempted to get rid of the caste system, which in this section you're watching the video on the caste system still. The untouchables, the Brahmins, of course, which were the top tier of the caste system. They had a vested interest in maintaining the caste system. they were part of the elites. So these groups and the lower parts were played against each other. Sati, which was the practice, British banned that. That was a practice where a wife would uh, kill herself and burn herself up with her husband when he was um, when he died and was cremated. She would kill herself, the first wife. So it was the British banned that practice. And the role of World War One and Two, the British needed troops for World War One and World War Two, and so they ended up negotiating. In World War One, they shipped Indian troops to Europe, where they fought in the trenches with other British Empire troops. And in World War II, they shipped them to throughout Asia and also into North Africa and Europe. But during World War II, there was also the Nazis had agents who were trying to get India to revolt, and so they were the British were very concerned about this, and so negotiated with the Indian National Congress, which was the uh, political party for freeing India from British control, to supply troops and to make sure that there wasn't a civil war going on in India during World War II, which would have been devastating to the Allied effort and particularly to British efforts. They negotiated to give freedom to India after the war, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But it's a key issue, even though there were some political problems, and this whole post World War II political situation in South Asia, where India allied itself with Russia, with the Soviet Union, um, and rather than with Britain and the United States during the Cold War, was a result of the British Raj. And so it's a pretty key factor in understanding the political situation in Afghanistan, in Kashmir, the political situation between um, India and Pakistan in particular, um, is very much defined by what happened at the end of the partition, and we're going to discuss that in just a second.